Hi, Dr. Tiffany.
How's it going, Val?
Is you know what? It's going great. That's all it can do, right?
It's Tuesday. It's time for Tuesday Talks.
Absolutely. I'm excited about this one.
Me too. And I know we say that every week. My voice is going in and out because the pollen in Georgia is out and it's attacking me. So my voice has been like squeaky all day long.
Yeah. Fortunately for me, I've never really had to deal with like allergies bothering me and giving me any kind of
What?
symptoms. No, but my family, other members of my family have though. So
Oh my
I see
God.
that yellow powder on the car, and I'm like, oh man, here we go.
Oh my gosh. It messes me up every single year. So the pollen is out in case anybody watching didn't know, the pollen is out. So tonight we have a really, really good topic, very timely, especially here in Georgia, because we are going to be discussing parent and teacher accountability as it relates to getting kids ready for state testing. Because
Right.
state testing time is coming up, and any kid in Georgia and in other states too, I know I worked in Virginia and in Texas as well. Um, Kids grades 3 through 12 do that annual state testing. So even if you're not in Georgia, this definitely will relate to your child's education as well. So we are going to dive right in. So I know you're at the middle school level. So this is something that's definitely creeping up on you. So what would you say are some of the issues? I know state testing isn't a favorite topic for a lot of parents. I know I've seen students be stressed out. I've seen parents be stressed out. I've also seen parents just be like, state testing, whatever, it's just another day at school. Just, go do your best and, whatever. So, what have been your experiences with that perception of state testing?
I'll just start with my personal one. So, growing up, going through school between the 80s and the 90s, um, testing was not that big of a deal. Like when I was a kid, it was like, yeah, this is important. You need to do your best. But there was no big to do made about and hammered in, you have to do your best. Like
Yeah.
that stress just didn't feel to me like it was there. And now that I'm a teacher, um, I feel all of the stress from an accountability standpoint. And like, I'm just going to put it out there because a lot of times state testing and how you feel about it is like an elephant in the room, and say that like take state testing sucks. Okay.
Does.
It takes up so much of the school year because it's not just one day of testing. It is an entire year of holding kids accountable for information that you've been giving them for this one day,
Yep.
and then holding teachers accountable for the scores that the kids get on this one day.
Yeah.
As an adult, I have a hard time remembering stuff that somebody told me a couple of days ago,
Exactly.
so to put that kind of pressure on a kid, I just feel like there has to be better ways. That's all I'm saying. It's very important, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
to have an assessment of where a kid is,
Hmm.
but I just feel like the way that we're doing it now could be done different. So, for example,
Hmm.
I have a student who is twice exceptional, means that she is on the autistic spectrum and she's gifted, which is
Oh, wow.
amazing to see. Like, really, it is absolutely, I
Yeah.
am so intrigued by her, and all the things that come with, what she has going on. However,
Hmm.
when it comes to testing, like just in our classroom, and again, I teach math, so that's already stressful. Um, she takes a very long time to take any test or any quiz, no matter what it is, no matter the
Mhm.
difficulty level. I think she goes through every question like 3 or 4 times
Oh,
when
wow.
she tests, and she gets testing accommodations, to be able to do that, but she visibly and physically shows a lot of signs of anxiety
Yeah.
to where recently she's been kind of breaking down and crying a lot
Wow.
during the test. And so I it's students like her that I feel like we don't think about when
Mhm.
we talk about all this testing and the pressure for it.
Yeah. And I know if kids receive special education services in schools, they can get testing accommodations where they might have more time to take the test. They can be in a small group to take the test, sometimes even one on one, if that's what is deemed appropriate for them to help reduce some of that anxiety, help them perform better on the test. But, if you are feeling that internal struggle, even just the anticipation leading up to test day can
Yes.
be very heavy on you. And we're talking about third graders. So this is like age 8, 9, typically. So having that stress put on them at such a young age is seems like a lot. And I'm sure that any teacher would agree, parents would definitely agree. And so it's one of those necessary evils because while the testing itself doesn't seem to reflect what a child has learned over the course of a school year because it's just a snapshot of that day at that time. Um, it does yield pretty significant results for the school district, and I know we'll dive into what those into what those data points show and how that drives funding for schools. But I did want to point out, even with these state tests, they don't really take into account transient populations. You have some communities where families move in, move out pretty frequently. If you have perhaps a military base close by, or just people moving for work purposes, and that can really impact a school's scores as well. And then also, it can clip some of the learning that a child has gained in one district if they're moving to another one.
Yes. Yeah. I don't so, talking about the students with special needs, talking about transient and migrant populations, I just feel like what is the point of taking an assessment if you're not going to use it for a specific reason? Um, so, and also to add to that, like, if you're going to test kids to see how they're doing, if that's your reason, then comparing this eighth grade class to the eighth grade class before it is
Mhm.
like comparing apples to oranges.
Oh yeah,
Unless you're going to use some longitudinal data to see, how students are progressing as they move through the district.
yeah,
So that's another thing that I think about when it comes to testing. I want to know how this child did based on how this child does, not really comparing them to everybody else.
yeah, for sure. And those data points, excuse me, are not always tracked for all students either. So if your child receives special education services, sometimes their scores count towards that school score, the school data points, and sometimes it doesn't. It just really it depends. They can have exemptions from reporting scores. Some students have alternative assessments where they're able to um, provide work samples so that that is evaluated at the state level. So it just seems like it's not really giving the information that is most important, which is how the kids are learning, what they're learning, and then what they're retaining from year to year. And like you said, you start off the school year, like last week, we talked about pacing guides, and you start off hitting the ground running because all roads lead to state testing in the spring. And the information yielded from those tests aren't necessarily um, indicative of what those kids can do in that grade level. So
Right.
there's a lot of weight put on those scores. So I know that you have some experience with some administrative and leadership training. So I know in Georgia they track the student data for test scores through, and that is public knowledge, public record. They post it on the website. So can you talk just a little bit about that for the Georgia Department of Education?
Yeah, so here in Georgia, each school in each district gets a score. And education is known for its alphabet soup of acronyms. So this is called CCRPI. Okay, and it's College and Career Readiness Performance Index.
Nice. It's a lot.
CCRPI. Okay, so but basically all it is a score for how well that school is doing, how well that district is doing in our state. And there's the testing is the biggest factor that they look at. But like Tiffany said, this is public knowledge. And so
Mhm.
what we want to do is show you how you can access it, parents, because it is available for you to access and see. And while she's pulling that up, it's like I said, a report for the school, and it's used to rank the schools a lot of times and how well they're doing. Communities like to know, how does this school compare to other schools in the state? So Tiffany just dropped a link in the chat, and I'll do it for my peeps as well. And
Mhm.
when you click on that link, you'll have to do a couple of clicks to get to where she is. You'll click on the reports. And as you can see, there's 4 categories here: content mastery, progress, closing the gaps, and readiness. And you can look at any school, any county, district in the state. All you gotta do is type it in. And so
Mhm.
when you look at content mastery, like how did they do on the test? Comparing from year to year, are they making progress? Are the groups, the like the minority groups and the special education groups, are they comparatively performing with other people? All of that is there for you. You can also click on the different schools when you get on this site. And if you look here, it breaks it down by category for what they're looking for. And one thing I do want to point out here is that if you look at the any of the categories, right up under it, it says
Mhm.
the attendance.
Right.
And that is a factor in the school score as well. Not just did they take the test and perform it, but what percent of the students took the test on that day for
Mhm.
that data. So it's important to get our kids to school, guys. Like, no matter how we feel about the test itself,
Yeah.
we need the kids to be there.
Yes. Yes. So it's interesting how this data is used, because you may think as a parent, well, they just take the test, they get the score. They're not really holding kids back. Sometimes, you can have a conversation with the school and maybe as the parent, you know, advocate for your kid to be moved on to the next grade if they didn't do so well in the assessment. But the data that is collected, it means a lot to the school districts. So you pointed out one instance where attendance is tracked. So kids that are eligible to take the test, what percentage of those kids took the test? So parents, when your kids don't come to school on test day, or they come late and they miss the test that started in the morning, it is a ding on the school because that's going to be reflected in their participation rate, which is dropping their percentage, and that is reflecting poorly on the school. So it is super important to get them to school on testing day. We know we already established that the state testing is kind of a bummer. We understand all the pitfalls, but this is the game that we're playing. And so we got to know the rules to play the game, because not only do the states look at district data for testing, it drives funding as well. So it's important. So, what are some other ways that schools use this data, Valerie?
So I'll just reiterate that one that you just said for funding.
Mhm.
Um, our federal government earmarks funds for schools across the nation. And sometimes part of that funding is based on how well the school is doing. And so a lot of states are responsible for coming up with and showing a way that showing the way that they are performing to the state for these funds. So the federal government has stipulations that the state has to meet in order to get the money that they receive.
Yep. Yep.
Testing is a part of that.
hmm And if you have ever searched for a home on Zillow or any of those real estate apps to look for a home, one of the first things, if you have kids, the first thing you are looking for, what are the schools like in that area? The zone that this house is, that this zone for school district attendance is, what is what are these schools? How are they doing? How are they ranked in the state? You can scroll down in that section. Those numbers that are associated with the elementary, middle, and high school for that district zoning are pulled from how that school and district rank overall in the state, and that is directly tied to those test scores from state testing. And so we know that as parents, we want to live in a neighborhood where there are good schools. And businesses also look at that data as well to come into an area, different industries. It could be grocery stores, it could be, just commerce stores, things that you just want to, shopping. They look at that as well to see, okay, is this a good area to move into? That's where they're going to pull their employees from, should they need summer work. So all of that is falls back on these state testing scores. So we got school funding, we have house prices and houses selling, we have um, commerce industries as well. And what about uh, the guidelines from the state? So if schools are consistently performing under what is deemed acceptable, what happens then, Valerie?
Well, there are these lists,
You don't want to
and
be on the list.
you do not, as a school, as a system, you do not want to be on a list. And basically, the list is just you're not performing where we need you to be per the state. And so you start off on sort of like a probationary period, where we're
Mhm,
going to tell you we're watching you. This is what we see that we don't like. This is what needs to be improved.
mhm,
And if you don't do better, then we can come in and we can take this over for you and do it like it's supposed to be. You don't
mhm.
want to get on the list.
You don't want to get on the list. So we always on Tuesday Talks like to pull in commentary from those watching live. And if you're watching this on the replay, drop your comments in the chat as well. Just, share what your experience has been with your child participating in state testing. If you're a parent, if you're a teacher, from your perspective of how your experience is in the classroom during state testing. I know it's a very serious time period in the school. What's the testing window? How long does it last?
So it depends on what level you're at. So anywhere from a week to a couple of weeks when you get up in the high school level.
Mhm,
But then again, don't forget that the prepping for it, like the official, okay, we're about to take this test in however many weeks, all of that also can be put into that time frame of how long it takes.
Gotcha. So I know as a speech therapist in the building, I couldn't pull any kids for their therapy sessions. And I was either a proctor in the classroom where I was maybe giving the instructions for a small group, or I had to sit in the hallway to make sure anybody who came out of the classroom walking down the hall was quiet and got to the bathroom and got back to the classroom
Mhm.
quickly. the whole school is impacted by it. So even if your child isn't in third through fifth grade at the elementary level, those kindergartens, first grade, and second graders, their days are shifted as well. When they go to specials, that time could possibly change. When they have their lunch, I know one school I worked in, the students had their lunch in the classroom. So the cafeteria workers brought it to the classroom. So everybody's day is shifted during this state testing window because it is such a big deal. So if you just kind of brushed it off as just another thing, just think about what we've shared tonight about why these scores are so important to schools. And Tuesday Talks, we don't like to leave without sharing some actionable ways to address the topic that we have discussed this week. So what, Valerie, are some of the teacher responsibilities? If we're talking about accountability, what are teachers held accountable for in getting these kids ready for state testing?
So first and foremost, teach the content.
Yes.
And I say that because there's this phrase of teaching to the test. Teaching, teachers are teaching to the test. Well, one, I think we just covered like why some teachers may feel like that's the position that they're being put in for that. At the same time, teachers understand that you're a professional and you most part went to school to train for this. Teach the content that you got into the classroom to teach. The kids will get it. And then, provide them review materials ahead of time. The state in Georgia has a study guide on their site for the GMAT at all levels. And so we have a link that we're going to drop in the chat for you. I mean, in the comments for you. So you can see that and pull it up for your kid and go through it. I've looked at them and used them and given them to kids before, and they're actually pretty good resources. It's not just a big, thick packet full of problems. It is things to consider, test taking tips, the study guide itself kind of leads you through how to prepare your child for the test. And then teachers, give that to the students, like give that link to them. If you're in a system where you're able to print some of that off for them, give them whatever resources you think will help them, and then go over test taking strategies. It's not that that's not important. It's just that the main thing is they got to know the content, and then test taking strategies just ensures that the content they know actually gets put out on the test that they're taking. And then the last thing that I would say for teachers that I feel like, we have to be accountable for is helping our kids with their mindfulness. Because again, this test is highly stressful, and a lot of kids already suffer from test anxiety. And so this is the biggest test that they take in the year. Highly, highly stressful. So just give them some ways. Like, for example, I've had my kids go through breathing exercises where we just sit and we take slow inhales in and extra slow inhales out. And after we do it, they're like, hey, that really helped. It does. Need y'all to breathe. Okay.
Those are really
good. Parents?
When you talked about test strategies, this is not one that I encourage anybody to use, but this was one I used in school, because when I was in school, that Iowa Basic Skills Test, the ITBS test, that's what we took. And so, if I didn't know the content, I didn't know the answer, it was always guess C as the right answer. So that's what I would always, you got to be faithful to C, and C will be faithful to you. And, look at me now, got me somewhere. That was one of my own test kids get together and talk about stuff. They're like, when in doubt, just pick C, just ride C out. But as far as parent responsibilities, I think it's super important to discuss the importance of these state tests that kids are taking. You don't want to put more stress on them than, they already are experiencing, but you do, if you get that sense that the child might not be taking the test as seriously as they should. Just
Right.
discussing that importance with them, making sure that kids get a good night's sleep. If you don't have a bedtime routine, even for older kids, make sure they get the rest that they need so that they can be ready in the morning for testing days. And then, before they leave the house, making sure they get a good breakfast. If they're eating breakfast at school, making sure you implore, them to eat all of the breakfast, because a starving mind it's hard to focus when you're hungry. So just make sure they have some nutrients in the morning before those tests as well. If it's possible, I know everybody's situations are different at home, but if you can remove any extraneous stress or frustrations going on at home, it's best to remove those at all times. But if you can remove them during that test taking window, that would be very helpful. So kids are focused on just that one thing, and that's getting in there and just doing their best on the state test. And then making sure that you incorporate some of that review and study time at home. If you use the link for the Georgia Department of Ed study guides and you live in Georgia, that could be very helpful. I know you share the teachers send home those study guides too. So maybe just reviewing some of that with them, and then also talking about how your child felt at the end of the testing day. So how did it go today with testing? Was it super hard? Do you feel like you did really good on it? Do you feel like it was challenging? You don't have to go beyond a couple of questions unless they really want to dive deeply into it. But asking those questions just shows them that it's also important to you. So that's
Mhm.
why it's a good idea to ask those questions. And then talk about some of those calming techniques. Valerie just reminded us about the breathing. So if you have your own practice of mindfulness as a parent, share those with your kids. If you don't, YouTube has a lot of great free resources. You can put in calming techniques for kids, and so many options will come up. So use those as a resource too. So if your child does um, have test anxiety and starts to feel anxious, that you can teach them to use some of those strategies in the classroom should those, that surge of emotion start to rise up. I know myself, I deal with anxiety as well. When that surge comes in that moment, you can't research and look up ways to handle it. You got to already know what to do. So it's good to just have those seeds planted in them so that they can pull on that knowledge in the moment when they need it for sure.
Yeah. And one thing I would add for both parents and for teachers is just simply having a conversation with the kids, a calm conversation with the kids, about the test itself and about how this is not a reflection of you as a
Mhm.
human, as an individual. This is not going to determine how smart you are or how not smart you are, or any of those things that sometimes we kind of insinuate
Mhm.
to kids, or that other kids, their peers, are already saying stuff about. But just letting them know, like, look, this is one day.
Yeah.
It's just trying to see what you know. And if you don't know something, then that's just telling us, what we could work on with you. And if
That's
you do know some stuff, that's great. I want you to show it on the test so everybody else can know that too. So I think
right.
that's also helpful, just to have that kind of conversation with them.
Definitely. So I know you mentioned this at the top of the episode, teachers reaching out to parents to remind them, hey, this testing window is coming up, initiating that contact with parents. I think it's great for all teachers to do so that, as a parent myself, we all have a lot on our plate, and testing
Mhm.
time is not something that's at the front of my mind as it is for a teacher. So initiating that contact with parents is really good, and sharing some of those tips that we talked about tonight would be helpful as well, because it might be a first time parent with a third grader and this is their first time engaging with state testing, so giving them some suggestions I think is super super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I
So
hope that you gain some knowledge here. We dropped those links in the chat. If you are not in Georgia, your state department of ed will have resources. You might have to dig a little, maybe even reach out to your child's teacher to ask if they can share the website with you. But all of the score reporting is public information. And then most states will also have those study guides out there as well, because they want the kids to do good on the test, because it all comes back and affects schools and districts in very significant ways.
Absolutely. We want to make sure that we're clear about who's accountable. We're all accountable.
Exactly.
Teachers, take accountability for your role in preparing the kids and letting the parents know what's coming up. And parents, take accountability in helping prepare your kids at home by giving them some peace, some structure for this time, some food to help their brain perform.
Yep. Good suggestions. Good suggestions. Well, thank you for everybody joining us live tonight. Thanks to everybody who's watching the replay. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in our comment section on the different platforms. We are here every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So we'll see you all next week. Bye.
Bye.